The Death Star's super laser represents one of the most extreme applications of directed energy weapons in science fiction. A weapon so powerful that it can annihilate an entire planet with a single shot. The fundamental principle behind such a weapon relies on focusing an immense amount of energy into a highly concentrated beam, which upon impact delivers enough force to overcome a planet's gravitational binding energy, causing it to explode. However, when viewed through the lens of real-world physics and engineering, the feasibility of such a system presents overwhelming challenges. The energy requirements alone are staggering, exceeding the total output of any known power source by orders of magnitude. The complexities of beam focusing, target acquisition, structural stability, cooling, and the vast logistical demands of a weapon of this scale make it an almost insurmountable engineering challenge, even when considering speculative advancements in future technology. The energy needed to destroy a planet like Alderaan can be estimated using gravitational binding energy equations, which suggest a requirement of around 10 to the power of 32 joules. This is roughly equivalent to the total energy output of the Sun over several hours and billions of times greater than the entire nuclear arsenal of modern Earth. In the Star Wars universe, the Death Star supposedly achieves this through a hypermatter reactor, a speculative technology beyond our understanding. In real-world physics, the closest analog would be a form of advanced fusion or antimatter annihilation. Fusion power, even at its theoretical peak, would be vastly insufficient to generate such energy instantaneously. Antimatter, on the other hand, could provide the necessary power, as the complete annihilation of mass and antimatter releases pure energy, according to Einstein's E equals mc² equation. However, the challenge with antimatter is twofold. Its production is extremely inefficient and currently requires more energy to create than it releases upon annihilation, and storage remains impossible due to its tendency to annihilate upon contact with normal matter. Even if a means of producing antimatter in large quantities were discovered, the containment of such vast amounts of energy would be unprecedented. The weapon's design involves a series of massive kyber crystals, which in Star Wars lore amplify and direct the energy output into a coherent beam. In the real world, high-energy laser systems rely on optical amplification and beam focusing, often using fiber optics, chemical reactions, or solid-state gain mediums. A system of this scale would require an incredibly efficient energy-to-photon conversion process. Real-world directed energy weapons, such as modern high-energy lasers, HLs, developed for military applications, struggle to exceed power levels in the megawatt range, whereas the Death Star's super laser operates at an energy scale exceeding yottawatts. The physics behind focusing a beam of this magnitude without catastrophic energy dispersion is another major obstacle. Beam coherence over astronomical distances requires nearly perfect collimation and control over atmospheric interference, diffraction, and energy losses due to scattering. The firing sequence of the super laser involves multiple smaller beams converging into a single, devastating blast. This presents additional engineering challenges, as each individual beam must be precisely aligned to ensure constructive interference at the focal point, rather than destructive interference that would reduce efficiency. In real-world physics, laser arrays can be synchronized using phase locking techniques, But on the scale of the Death Star, maintaining such precision over thousands of kilometers is a formidable challenge. Additionally, aiming a weapon of this magnitude requires extremely precise targeting systems. Any minute misalignment would result in a significant deviation at interplanetary distances. Modern optical and radar-based targeting systems used in ballistic missile defense operate at vastly smaller scales and still struggle with precision due to atmospheric distortions and tracking limitations. The Death Star would require a guidance system orders of magnitude more accurate, likely employing gravitational lensing effects, advanced AI-assisted targeting, and real-time compensations for planetary movements. A significant limitation of such a weapon would be the heat generated during energy discharge. High-powered lasers on Earth require extensive cooling systems to prevent the optics from melting, and even small-scale systems must account for heat buildup. The Death Star's superlaser would generate heat at a level comparable to a small star, requiring a method to rapidly dissipate excess energy. In a vacuum, where convection is non-existent, heat dissipation relies on radiation, which is an inefficient process for cooling such an enormous system. A more realistic approach might involve using an advanced heat sink system, liquid metal cooling, or some form of energy absorption and redirection to prevent structural damage to the station itself. The sheer scale of thermal management required makes it one of the most challenging aspects of such a weapon. The rate of fire of the superlaser is another factor to consider. In Star Wars canon, the weapon requires time to charge between shots, suggesting an immense energy buildup process. Real-world high-energy weapons, such as railguns and laser defense systems, also experience limitations due to recharge time and thermal management. The operational constraints of such a weapon would mean that it could not be fired rapidly, as each shot would require an enormous influx of energy and sufficient time to allow the system to stabilize. This aligns with theoretical concepts of high-powered particle beam weapons in hard science fiction, where energy regeneration and cooling times limit sustained fire. The structural integrity of the Death Star itself must also be examined in relation to the weapon's recoil. In traditional firearms, Newton's third law dictates that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. A weapon capable of expelling such an extreme amount of energy in a concentrated beam would theoretically exert an enormous amount of force on the station itself. The design would need to account for this to avoid catastrophic structural failure. A potential solution could involve counter-thrust mechanisms, or the weapon could be designed to emit negligible physical recoil due to the nature of electromagnetic beam projection. However, even if recoil were not a direct concern, the immense energy discharge could exert stress on the superstructure, requiring ultra-dense materials capable of withstanding extreme thermal and mechanical loads. Real-world analogs for such a weapon are few, but some concepts in modern military and scientific research hint at the early steps toward directed energy weapons of high power. The Excalibur project, a Cold War-era initiative to develop space-based X-ray lasers powered by nuclear detonations, was an early attempt to harness extreme energy for a directed beam weapon. While ultimately abandoned, the concept demonstrated that nuclear-driven energy release could, in theory, power a high-intensity laser. Similarly, research into particle beam weapons suggests that highly accelerated charged particles could serve as an alternative to laser-based superweapons, though their range and energy requirements are still far beyond current technology. The most scientifically plausible alternative to the Death Star's superlaser would likely be a relativistic kill vehicle, RKV, a massive projectile accelerated to near-light speed. While lacking the instant devastation of a superlaser, an object moving at relativistic speeds would carry kinetic energy sufficient to destroy a planet upon impact. The energy released from such a collision would be comparable to the gravitational binding energy of a planet, with far fewer engineering obstacles than a directed energy superweapon. Ultimately, while the Death Star's superlaser remains an iconic and terrifying example of fictional weaponry, its real-world feasibility is constrained by insurmountable energy demands, material limitations, targeting challenges, and thermal management issues. While certain aspects, such as high-energy beam focusing and advanced targeting systems, align with existing research into directed energy weapons, the sheer scale of destruction required places it firmly in the realm of speculative science fiction. Even with future advancements in energy production and material science, constructing a weapon capable of planetary destruction through a directed energy beam would require breakthroughs beyond our current understanding of physics. The propulsion systems of the Death Star are a critical part of its design, enabling it to traverse space and perform certain maneuvers despite its immense size. While its primary function is to serve as a massive weapon, the ability to move between planets, engage in combat, and position itself strategically is essential. However, designing a propulsion system capable of moving such an enormous structure raises a number of significant technical challenges. To understand the real-world feasibility of the Death Star's propulsion systems, we must consider both theoretical space propulsion technologies and the constraints imposed by its sheer scale. Given the Death Star's size, 200 kilometers in diameter, and the mass of tens of billions of tons, its propulsion system would need to generate an extraordinary amount of thrust. Realistically, no known propulsion system in use today could achieve such a task. For reference, even the most powerful spacecraft, like the NASA Space Shuttle, with its relatively small mass compared to the Death Star, requires millions of pounds of thrust to launch from Earth's surface. The engines of the Death Star would need to operate on an entirely different scale to provide sufficient power to move its massive structure through space. One possibility for the Death Star's propulsion system might involve the use of fusion-powered engines, a concept based on the principle of nuclear fusion. Fusion engines would use the energy produced by the fusion of hydrogen atoms to create a highly efficient and powerful form of thrust. These engines would operate similarly to the concept of fusion rockets, where the heat generated by fusion reactions would be used to propel ions out of a nozzle at extremely high velocities, generating thrust. The efficiency of such a system would be significantly higher than chemical rockets, which currently provide the best-known thrust-to-weight ratio for space launches. While current fusion reactor technology is far from capable of powering such a system, theoretical fusion propulsion could offer the energy density required for the Death Star to move through space. However, even with fusion engines, the scale of the Death Star presents additional complications. A fusion propulsion system capable of accelerating such a massive structure would require an incredibly large and efficient power distribution network. This network would need to ensure that the energy produced by the fusion reactors could be distributed across the Death Star's vast infrastructure to not only power the engines, but also to run its various systems, especially the superlaser, which requires enormous amounts of energy. The management of energy resources would likely involve a highly advanced form of superconductivity, allowing the Death Star to conduct large amounts of electrical current with minimal loss of energy. In addition to generating thrust for propulsion, the Death Star's engines would also have to deal with the enormous heat produced by such powerful reactors. In real-world engineering, heat management is a key consideration when designing large-scale energy systems. For example, nuclear reactors on Earth require advanced cooling systems to prevent overheating. A comparable solution for the Death Star would likely involve a series of heat radiators or heat exchangers which could dissipate excess heat into space. Since space is a vacuum, thermal radiation would be the primary method of cooling, and any excess heat from the fusion reactors or propulsion engines would need to be efficiently radiated away. The vast size of the Death Star suggests that its cooling systems would be spread across its surface, with high-tech radiators placed strategically around the station to ensure that its temperature remains within operational limits. Furthermore, the Death Star's ability to maneuver would be another critical aspect of its propulsion system. In space, maneuverability is a key challenge for massive objects, as traditional methods of controlling a ship, such as aerodynamic surfaces, do not apply in the vacuum of space. To change direction, the Death Star would rely on reaction control systems, small thrusters positioned at various points on its structure. These thrusters would allow for fine adjustments in attitude, enabling the Death Star to orient itself properly for weapons firing or evasive maneuvers. The reaction control thrusters would likely operate using monopropellant or bipropellant systems, where the chemical reaction between fuel and oxidizer produces the thrust. These thrusters would be distributed across the surface of the station to provide even and controlled adjustments. The challenge of accelerating and decelerating a structure as large as the Death Star is compounded by its mass. For example, when considering the acceleration of a mass like the Death Star, Newton's second law, force equals mass times acceleration, makes it clear that even a powerful propulsion system would have difficulty achieving rapid acceleration. The acceleration times for such a structure would be incredibly long, requiring years to reach significant fractions of the speed of light, unless a much more advanced propulsion technology, such as matter-antimatter propulsion, were used. Matter-antimatter engines theoretically offer the highest possible energy density and would allow the Death Star to accelerate much more quickly. This technology would involve the annihilation of matter and antimatter, producing vast amounts of energy that could be harnessed to propel the station. However, as of now, such propulsion remains purely theoretical, and building an antimatter engine on the scale required for the Death Star would be an immense challenge, not only in terms of energy production, but also in managing the risks of antimatter containment. The Death Star's energy needs extend far beyond propulsion. To power its engines, weapon systems, shields, and life support, the station would require an enormous energy distribution system. This system would be responsible for converting the raw energy from the fusion or matter-antimatter reactors into usable power for all the station systems. Energy conduits would need to be distributed throughout the station, and these conduits would likely use advanced superconducting materials to minimize energy loss during transmission. The complexity of these systems increases when considering the cooling needs of such a massive infrastructure. In real-world engineering, large facilities with complex power grids require constant maintenance and oversight to ensure reliability, and the Death Star would likely be no different. Its energy distribution and cooling systems would need constant monitoring, and failures in these systems could have catastrophic consequences. In terms of maneuverability, while the Death Star is undoubtedly a massive and slow-moving object, the fact that it is depicted as being capable of repositioning itself within a battle or moving between star systems suggests that its propulsion system is far more advanced than anything humanity has yet developed. Whether through some form of hyperspace travel for long-range movement or more advanced forms of propulsion for in-system maneuvers, the Death Star's ability to function as a mobile battle station requires a combination of propulsion, energy distribution, and cooling systems that are orders of magnitude beyond current technologies. Ultimately, while the Death Star's engines are a marvel of science fiction engineering, their realism remains speculative. Current propulsion technologies such as fusion and ion drives offer insights into what might one day be possible. But the scale and energy requirements of such a station present significant obstacles. However, considering the potential for future advancements in energy generation, propulsion, and material science, the conceptualization of a mobile space station like the Death Star, though highly unlikely with today's technology, is not entirely beyond the realm of possibility in the distant future. The hyperdrive system of the Death Star is a monumental feat of engineering, integral to its ability to traverse the vast distances of the galaxy in a timely manner. Given the Death Star's colossal size and the energy demands required for its operation, the hyperdrive system would have to operate at an extraordinarily high level of efficiency. Understanding how such a system could function, the energy it would require, the maintenance necessary to keep it running, and its role in interplanetary warfare offers valuable insight into its realistic feasibility. The principle of operation behind the Death Star's hyperdrive revolves around the manipulation of space-time itself. Hyperdrive technology in Star Wars allows for faster-than-light FTL travel by entering hyperspace, a dimension distinct from normal space. While current physics does not support the existence of hyperspace, speculative concepts from theoretical physics provide a foundation for imagining how such a system might operate. One of the most widely discussed real-world analogs is the Alcubierre drive, which theorizes the ability to warp space-time around a ship, creating a warp bubble that moves faster than light, while the ship itself remains within normal space, thus avoiding relativistic limitations. The energy required for such a mechanism is immense, and it's likely that the Death Star's hyperdrive would be powered by an advanced form of energy generation, possibly involving fusion or antimatter reactors. both of which are capable of producing the kinds of energy levels necessary for such feats. To power the hyperdrive, the Death Star would need a dedicated energy source capable of producing a constant, stable flow of energy. Considering the station's size, its energy systems would likely be distributed across multiple fusion reactors or a central core designed specifically to manage the extreme power demands. The creation and maintenance of a hyperspace field would require immense amounts of energy to distort the fabric of space-time in the manner required for FTL travel. These energy demands would also have to be carefully balanced with the other systems aboard the station, such as life support, weapons, and defense, each of which would require a substantial amount of energy to operate efficiently. A critical aspect of the Death Star's hyperdrive would be its ability to maintain operational efficiency while minimizing the risk of catastrophic failures. Given the complexity of manipulating space-time at such a scale, the system would be highly sensitive to malfunctions or suboptimal performance. Consequently, the hyperdrive system would require constant monitoring, with real-time diagnostics performed to detect any anomalies that might compromise its performance. Technicians aboard the station would likely need to be highly specialized in the workings of the hyperdrive and its supporting systems. Regular maintenance would be critical to ensure that the system continues to operate at peak efficiency, which would involve checks on the various components, including the hyperspace conduit, the power distribution network, and the energy modulators. Cooling the hyperdrive would be another significant challenge. The immense energy generated by the hyperdrive system would create substantial waste heat, potentially threatening the structural integrity of the ship and causing malfunctions in sensitive components. Advanced cooling systems would be required to manage the excess heat produced during hyperspace travel. These systems might include superconducting materials capable of channeling and dissipating the heat effectively, as well as heat exchangers and radiators to transfer heat away from critical areas and dissipate it into the vacuum of space. Given the massive scale of the Death Star, these cooling systems would need to be distributed throughout the station to avoid localized overheating, ensuring that the hyperdrive system remains functional even during long-distance travel. When considering the energy consumption of the Death Star's hyperdrive, the sheer scale of the power required to move such a massive station becomes evident. For comparison, even the most advanced theoretical propulsion systems, such as those proposed for interstellar travel, require energy outputs orders of magnitude higher than anything currently achievable. The amount of energy required for the Death Star's hyperdrive would far exceed the capabilities of today's most powerful reactors, making it necessary to utilize novel energy generation methods, perhaps involving the harnessing of exotic materials like dark matter or zero-point energy. These theoretical energy sources could provide the enormous power needed for long-distance hyperspace travel, though their feasibility remains speculative. However, it is important to note that the Death Star's design may incorporate redundancies, allowing multiple, smaller hyperdrive units to work in tandem, ensuring reliability and stability during travel. From a military perspective, the ability to travel at faster-than-light speeds provides the Death Star with significant strategic advantages. In interplanetary warfare, where battles occur across vast distances and in multiple star systems, The ability to deploy troops, weapons, and resources across these distances with minimal delay is crucial. The Death Star's hyperdrive would allow it to deploy its devastating weapons, particularly the super laser, on an unprecedented scale. With a hyperdrive capable of moving the station swiftly between key locations, the Death Star could project power across the galaxy, threatening entire planetary systems before enemy forces have time to react. The hyperdrive's strategic importance cannot be overstated. It would be the backbone of the Death Star's power projection, enabling it to function as a mobile base of operations. By rapidly moving between star systems, it could disrupt enemy operations and establish dominance over large swathes of territory. The ability to strike quickly, without the logistical delays of conventional travel, would allow the Empire to maintain constant pressure on rebellious systems, keeping the threat of the Death Star ever present. In terms of realism, while current technology is far from achieving the requirements for a functional hyperdrive, future advances in energy production, space-time manipulation, and propulsion technology could pave the way for such systems to be theoretically possible. While hyperdrive, as envisioned in Star Wars, remains far beyond the reach of modern science, ideas like the Alcubierre drive continue to push the boundaries of what might one day be achievable. For now, however, the Death Star's hyperdrive exists as a fascinating piece of speculative technology, serving as both a narrative tool and a reminder of the vast technological leaps required to truly harness the power of faster-than-light travel. The design of the Death Star represents one of the most ambitious and complex engineering feats in science fiction. It combines advanced technology, enormous scale, and a unique aesthetic to create a formidable weapon of war. However, beyond the visual spectacle of a moon-sized battle station, the underlying design must be understood in terms of the practical considerations required to support such a massive structure and the thousands of systems and personnel it contains. While the Death Star is a fictional concept, it offers a unique challenge when assessing its realism in the context of future technology. The sheer dimensions of the Death Star make it one of the most impressive and imposing structures in the Star Wars universe. The first Death Star, as depicted in A New Hope, is approximately 160 kilometers, 99 miles, in diameter, while the second, larger Death Star is 200 kilometers, 124 miles, in diameter. These colossal measurements are nearly unimaginable within the context of real-world engineering, where the largest human-made structures are dwarfed by the scale of the Death Star. To construct such a station, a vast amount of material would be needed, requiring advanced mining and manufacturing technologies. Building this structure would likely involve the use of automated construction systems and nanotechnology to process and assemble the materials efficiently. To support this immense structure, the Death Star would need an equally vast and powerful power plant. Given the size and function of the station, the power required would be unimaginable by current standards. The most plausible energy source for such a weapon of mass destruction would be a combination of fusion reactors, possibly utilizing deuterium and helium-3 as fuel, or even antimatter as a more theoretical power source. These reactors would not only supply power to the station's numerous systems, including life support, weapons and propulsion, but also drive the massive super laser that powers the Death Star's most devastating weapon. Maintaining such an energy production system on such a large scale would demand extremely sophisticated thermal management and cooling systems to dissipate the heat generated by the reactors. The power plant itself would be located deep within the station structure, shielded from enemy fire and ensuring stable, continuous operation. Surrounding the Death Star is a layer of deflector shields, which are one of its key defensive features. These energy shields protect the station from physical impacts, including projectiles and energy blasts, as well as from natural space debris, such as meteoroids. In realistic terms, such shields would likely be based on electromagnetic fields or gravitational manipulation, allowing them to deflect or absorb incoming energy. The shields would have to be immensely powerful to withstand the energy output of other ships' weapons and even the Death Star's own super laser. Maintaining these shields would require sophisticated energy management systems, continuously feeding power to maintain their strength and coverage. Additionally, the shields would need to be designed for rapid adaptation, with the ability to focus on specific areas of the station under attack. Their primary drawback is that they would be susceptible to overload from concentrated fire or powerful weaponry, capable of piercing such defenses. In terms of armor, the Death Star would likely utilize a combination of reinforced materials capable of withstanding extreme stresses. The outer shell would need to be capable of absorbing or dispersing massive amounts of kinetic and thermal energy. Modern-day titanium alloys, carbon nanotubes, or even more exotic materials like graphene might form the basis for the outer layers of the station. The armor would also need to be layered, with inner structures designed to maintain the station's integrity in case the outer layers were damaged or breached. Given the Death Star's immense size, maintaining structural integrity in the face of enemy bombardment and internal stresses caused by its massive weight would be a constant challenge for its engineers. Inside the Death Star, the hull would consist of numerous interconnected modules designed to support the station's various systems. These modules would house critical infrastructure from power generation and storage to weapons and crew facilities. The hull would need to be built with an eye toward efficient resource distribution, ensuring that power, materials, and information could be transmitted across the station with minimal delay and loss of energy. The internal design would include numerous bulkheads and blast doors to compartmentalize the station, preventing damage from breaches or catastrophic events from spreading throughout the entire structure. The life support systems aboard the Death Star would be as sophisticated as the weapon systems themselves. The vast number of personnel aboard the station would require continuous access to breathable air, temperature regulation, water, and waste management. The systems would need to operate redundantly to ensure that they remain functional under a variety of conditions, particularly in the event of combat or environmental disruptions. The Death Star's life support system would include atmospheric processors to filter and replenish oxygen levels, water reclamation systems to recycle moisture, and gravity generators to simulate Earth-like conditions for crew comfort and safety. The communication systems aboard the Death Star would need to be both secure and highly efficient, capable of transmitting data across vast distances of space. Given the size of the station, local communication networks would likely be based on advanced forms of laser communication, which allow for high-speed data transfer over vast distances without interference. To communicate with fleet units, planetary defenses, and command centers, the Death Star would need both encrypted radio and laser channels to ensure reliable and secure transmission of mission-critical information. The communication systems would also have to manage internal traffic, coordinating with thousands of personnel and providing updates on the station's operational status. The scanners and sensor systems aboard the Death Star would need to be equally advanced, with an emphasis on long-range detection and targeting. These scanners would be used to detect incoming enemy ships, track potential threats, and gather intelligence on planetary systems. The sensors could operate across multiple wavelengths, including radio, infrared, and optical, to detect a broad range of phenomena. However, the vast size of the station presents unique challenges. Sensors would need to be powerful enough to cover the station's entire perimeter, from its core to the farthest edges, without being overwhelmed by the amount of data they collect. The lighting systems aboard the Death Star would likely follow a modular design, allowing for lighting adjustments in different parts of the station based on the operational needs and the activities taking place. For instance, areas requiring high visibility for sensitive operations might have bright, focused lighting, while more industrial or maintenance areas might use dimmer, more energy-efficient lights. Given the station's colossal size, lighting would need to be distributed evenly throughout the entire structure, ensuring crew members could navigate the station without difficulty. In terms of crew life conditions, the Death Star would need to accommodate tens of thousands of personnel, from military commanders and soldiers to engineers, technicians, and scientists. Crew members would live and work in a variety of environments, depending on their roles and duties. The station would feature a network of living quarters, workspaces, mess halls, and recreational areas to support the mental and physical well-being of its crew. The design of the station would likely include zones designed for comfort and rest, as well as high security areas, particularly for command and control personnel. Cargo capacity is another crucial element of the Death Star's design. The station would need vast storage areas to house everything from supplies for the crew to munitions and spare parts for the massive weapon systems. The cargo holds would need to be organized to allow for rapid access to critical supplies during combat operations. The size of the cargo capacity would also make it possible to transport additional equipment, fighters, and vehicles, facilitating operations in hostile systems or planetary invasions, maintaining the Death Star's vast array of systems and ensuring the well-being of its crew would be a monumental challenge. Its design would have to incorporate the best of futuristic technology to enable it to function as a highly effective warship, capable of conducting sustained operations in the most hostile environments. The real-world equivalents to such a structure might involve a combination of orbital shipyards, space factories, and cutting-edge resource extraction technologies, making the Death Star a symbol not just of military might, but of humanity's potential to master space at an unimaginable scale. The crew of the Death Star is an essential element in its operation, from its day-to-day functions to its combat readiness. This vast moon-sized space station requires a highly organized and disciplined crew, operating in a hierarchical structure designed to ensure efficiency, security, and the ability to execute complex operations. The size of the station, with its massive systems, weapons, and defensive measures, necessitates a significant workforce ranging from the highest-ranking officers to the lowest-ranking technicians and maintenance personnel. The crew's organization, training, morale, and equipment are all critical to the functionality of such a large and complex vessel. At the top of the Death Star's command structure is the vehicle commander, typically a high-ranking officer, such as an admiral or a MOF. This individual holds ultimate authority over the station, directing all military and operational actions. In the case of the Death Star, the commander would answer directly to the Emperor, with delegated authority to act as the strategic overseer of all actions within the station. The position of vehicle commander requires extensive experience in military leadership, strategic planning, and space warfare. The commander's responsibilities would include overseeing fleet coordination, managing planetary assaults, issuing orders related to the superlaser, and making critical decisions in combat situations. Given the Death Star's significant size, the commander would need to rely heavily on subordinate officers to handle specific sections of the station's operations. Below the vehicle commander, the station is divided into multiple departments, each of which is responsible for managing different aspects of the station's functionality. These departments include command and control, engineering, weapons, communications, life support, logistics, and security. Each department has its own hierarchy of officers and personnel, all working in sync to ensure that the Death Star can function smoothly. Within each department, there would be a specialized focus. For instance, within weapons control, there would be officers and technicians focused on operating and maintaining the superlaser and point defense guns, while engineering personnel would manage the power plant, propulsion systems, and structural integrity. The complexity of these systems means that the Death Star's crew must be not only large but also extremely specialized in their respective fields. The majority of the Death Star's personnel would be trained to perform specific tasks related to their department. But there is an element of universal training for all crew members. Basic training would involve orientation on station operations, standard operating procedures, emergency protocols, and combat drills. For those in leadership roles, specialized training in military tactics, leadership, and advanced weapon systems would be essential. As with any military hierarchy, crew members would receive a progression of training and promotions based on their performance, skills, and experience. However, in the case of the Empire, much of the crew, particularly the stormtroopers and other enlisted personnel, would likely be clones, trained from birth for military service, either on Camino or in other Imperial training facilities. The role of clones in the Imperial military is significant, especially considering the need for a highly trained and reliable workforce in the harsh, high-stakes environment of the Death Star. The cloning process ensures that the Empire has a vast and consistent pool of soldiers and personnel who can be trained rapidly and put into service with a minimum of downtime. Clones are bred specifically for obedience, discipline, and a strong sense of duty, although their lack of individuality might present a challenge to morale in long-term assignments. They are trained to be excellent soldiers, capable of performing their roles with precision and efficiency. Clones on the Death Star would likely fill key positions in the security forces, maintenance, engineering, and technical support, as well as some combat roles during planetary invasions. While clones represent a large portion of the crew, the Empire also relies on ordinary recruits who come from various parts of the galaxy, whether they are volunteers or conscripts. These individuals, unlike the clones, have more varied backgrounds and might require more extensive training to adapt to the structured, demanding environment of the Death Star. These personnel would be recruited for their specialized skills, whether as engineers, communication specialists, or medical staff, and would undergo training specific to their role in the Death Star's operations. Given the sheer size of the station, this personnel would likely come from many different planets within the Empire, bringing a diversity of experiences and skills to the crew. The training process for ordinary recruits, particularly those in non-combat roles, would likely focus heavily on the technical aspects of operating a massive space station. Recruits would learn to work within highly advanced systems, becoming familiar with the intricate mechanisms of the Death Star's power systems, life support, weapon systems, and defensive measures. The training would be rigorous, demanding precise execution under pressure. Recruits would also undergo combat drills to prepare them for potential breaches, sabotage, or external threats. Another crucial element of crew life on the Death Star is morale, which could be easily influenced by the extreme living and working conditions, as well as the overwhelming focus on military objectives. Life on such a massive station would lack the normal comforts of civilian life. The vastness of the structure might create a sense of isolation for some personnel, particularly those far from the central command or weapons areas. The claustrophobic conditions within certain sections of the station, such as the maintenance tunnels or energy plants, would contribute to a sense of confinement. Furthermore, the constant focus on war and destruction, combined with the presence of the Imperial military hierarchy, could create an atmosphere of fear and tension. However, the strict discipline and constant surveillance on the Death Star would ensure that morale remained sufficiently high to keep personnel focused on their tasks. Commanders would implement regular motivational programs to ensure crew cohesion, often emphasizing loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperial cause. The Empire would also have a vested interest in ensuring that the crew remains functional and motivated, especially given the critical nature of the Death Star's mission. The equipment used by the Death Star's crew is critical for the smooth operation of the station. Each individual would be issued with personal equipment tailored to their role. For security personnel, this would likely include blasters, armor, and comms gear, while engineers and technical staff would use specialized tools designed to repair and maintain complex systems. In combat situations, crew members might be issued vacuum-sealed armor for protection against the station's internal environmental conditions. In addition to personal equipment, the Death Star would make use of automated systems, including droids and specialized repair units, to assist with both combat and technical operations. The role of astromech droids aboard the Death Star would be an essential one, particularly for managing the station's mechanical systems. Astromech droids like R2-D2 serve as multitasking robots, equipped with a variety of tools for diagnostics, repair, and communication. These droids could help keep the Death Star's vast array of complex machinery functioning properly by performing maintenance tasks, running diagnostic tests, and assisting the crew with system troubleshooting. They might also function as messengers, relaying orders and instructions between sections of the station. Their presence on the Death Star would help alleviate some of the workload for the human crew, enabling more efficient operation of the station. The regulations governing the Death Star's crew would follow strict military protocols and Imperial laws. Crew members would be expected to adhere to a code of conduct that emphasizes obedience, loyalty, and efficiency. There would be little room for personal expression or disobedience. These regulations would cover all aspects of daily life, from work hours to emergency procedures. Furthermore, the penalties for breaking regulations or failing to perform duties would be severe, possibly resulting in detention or execution. The Empire would make sure that discipline is maintained by a network of loyal officers and commanders who ensure that orders are followed to the letter. In summary, the crew of the Death Star operates within a highly organized, disciplined, and hierarchical structure. Whether made up of clones, ordinary personnel, or advanced droids, each member plays a critical role in the station's functionality. Their training, morale, equipment, and adherence to regulations are integral to maintaining the Death Star as a fully operational weapon of galactic domination. The production of the Death Star represents a monumental feat of engineering, logistics, and industrial capacity, stretching the limits of what is technologically and organizationally possible within the Galactic Empire. The development, design, construction, and overall logistics involved in producing such an immense and complex structure would require a vast network of specialized resources, facilities, and workforce, spanning multiple star systems. Given the Death Star's size and power, its production would be an unparalleled effort in galactic history, drawing upon the Empire's most advanced technologies, highly organized production processes, and extensive slave labor forces. The development of the Death Star would have begun with the Imperial High Command, likely under the direct orders of the Emperor, following the conclusion of the Clone Wars. The need for a superweapon capable of annihilating entire planets became a strategic priority for the Empire, not only for its military dominance, but as a psychological tool to instill fear and obedience across the galaxy. To fulfill this ambition, the Empire would have needed to engage the galaxy's best engineers, scientists, and designers, perhaps calling upon Imperial advisors or personnel who had previously worked on the design of other high-tech weapons, such as the TIE fighters or Star Destroyers. In designing the Death Star, the primary focus would have been on functionality and scale, with much of the initial conceptual work being undertaken in highly classified Imperial research facilities. Given the scope of the project, it would have taken many years for the first schematics to be completed, incorporating both the functionality of the superlaser and the necessary infrastructure to support such a massive station. The superlaser in particular would have presented a significant design challenge, requiring a power source capable of unleashing immense amounts of energy while maintaining the station's integrity. The design would have incorporated modularity and redundancy into its systems to ensure that it could operate continuously despite the size and complexity of the station. The construction of the Death Star would have likely been carried out in a series of stages, using a combination of modular construction and high-tech assembly lines to produce the components needed to build such an immense structure. Much of the raw material needed for the project would have been sourced from various planets and mining facilities across the galaxy, with highly efficient logistic systems in place to transport these resources to specialized shipyards and construction sites. The first Death Star's construction, under the leadership of Grand Moff Tarkin and other high-ranking Imperial officials, was carried out in the Outer Rim territories, far from the prying eyes of the Rebel Alliance and other galactic entities. Modular production would have been essential in making the Death Star project feasible. Given the sheer size of the station, it would have been impossible to construct it all in one piece. Instead, large sections of the station, such as its superlaser components, propulsion systems, deflector shields, and structural frameworks, would have been built separately before being assembled into the final station. These modules would likely have been constructed at enormous spaceship yards, such as the secretive Kuat Systems engineering yards or other Imperial facilities located in remote areas of the galaxy. Some parts of the Death Star may have even been constructed on orbiting space stations or in underground facilities on planets with the necessary industrial infrastructure. For example, the superlaser could have been built in sections before being transported and assembled, with massive industrial tools used to calibrate and assemble the components. Similarly, the hull of the Death Star would have been constructed in segments, with each section being assembled and welded together in space. Given the scale of the project, logistics would have played a crucial role in ensuring that all the components were delivered on time and to the correct specifications. The Empire would have relied on a combination of automated systems, cargo haulers, and massive freighters to transport these materials from various sources to the construction site. Given the importance of secrecy, much of the logistical operation would have been handled by Imperial intelligence and military personnel to avoid any leaks or interference from the Rebel Alliance. Any disruptions in the supply chain could have delayed construction, so the Empire would have gone to great lengths to secure all materials and routes. The workforce responsible for the construction of the Death Star would have been vast, and this labor force would have been composed of several distinct groups. At the top of the labor hierarchy would have been the Imperial engineers, scientists, and project managers, each specialized in one or more aspects of the Death Star's construction, from weapon systems to power generation to environmental life support. These individuals would have had to ensure that all systems were functioning properly and would likely have worked in close coordination with the highest levels of the Empire's leadership to ensure the project stayed on schedule. The bulk of the labor force, however, would likely have been made up of Imperial slaves, prisoners, and forced laborers. Much of this workforce would have come from the underprivileged populations of conquered systems, transported to the Death Star's construction sites under duress. The Empire's policy of using slave labor would have been crucial in driving down costs and ensuring the project's progress. These laborers would have worked in dangerous conditions, often with little regard for safety, under the threat of punishment or execution for failure to meet quotas. It is likely that most of the construction would have involved manual labor, with workers assembling large sections of the station's frame, laying down wiring, installing shielding, or assisting with the superlacer's construction. Many of these workers would have also been tasked with maintaining the facility's systems, making sure that power was distributed to the correct locations, keeping the hyperdrive and propulsion systems functional, and ensuring the stability of the hull during assembly. Due to the importance of secrecy, covert operations would have been necessary throughout the construction process. There would have been heavy security present at the shipyards and other production facilities to prevent the Rebel Alliance or other enemies from discovering the true purpose of the station. Imperial intelligence services would have been involved in monitoring both the workforce and external threats, ensuring that leaks or sabotage were swiftly dealt with. The cost of constructing the Death Star would have been astronomical, far surpassing the budgets of conventional Imperial projects. The combination of the sheer size of the station, the highly advanced technology it incorporated, and the specialized labor forces involved would have resulted in expenses that the Empire could comfortably absorb, given its vast resources. The Death Star would likely have been funded by the Emperor's personal funds, siphoned off from Imperial taxes and the riches of conquered worlds. However, for the Empire, the cost was an investment in its ultimate weapon, one capable of bringing entire star systems under its control and enforcing its authoritarian rule across the galaxy. The company or manufacturer responsible for the construction and design of the Death Star would likely have been a subsidiary or division of the Kuat Drive Yards, or a similar massive corporation specializing in large-scale ship construction. Companies like Kuat Systems Engineering and CNR Fleet Systems had long been involved in designing and constructing advanced Imperial vessels like the Star Destroyer, and it is likely they would have been tasked with building key components of the Death Star. These companies would have worked under the direct supervision of the Empire's Imperial Engineering Corps, which would have directed the overall project to ensure that the station's design, construction, and functionality met Imperial specifications. Finally, the final assembly of the Death Star would have taken place in a dedicated orbital dock, potentially constructed specifically for the purpose of completing the station. This dock would have been equipped with powerful industrial tools and machinery capable of handling the enormous weight of the Death Star's components. Once fully assembled, the Death Star would undergo rigorous testing, including systems checks, combat trials, and integration of all weapons and defensive systems. The final phase of testing would have been critical to ensuring the station was ready for its ultimate mission, to serve as the Empire's weapon of galactic control. In conclusion, the production of the Death Star would have been a gargantuan, highly coordinated effort, requiring the resources, manpower, and logistical support of an entire galactic empire. From the initial design phase to the final assembly and operational testing, the process would have taken years and would have involved massive investments of time, labor, and resources. The creation of such a monumental weapon would leave an indelible mark on the galaxy, symbolizing the Empire's technological supremacy and its ultimate ambitions for control. The concept of a superweapon capable of annihilating entire planets had been in the minds of tyrants and power-hungry rulers for millennia, even dating back to the Sith Empire. The ancient Sith, known for their dark aspirations and thirst for domination, had toyed with the idea of creating a planet-killing weapon, though such ideas had never come to fruition. It wasn't until the rise of the Galactic Empire that the project truly began to take form. The origin of the Death Star, or DS-1, can be traced back to the planet Geonosis during the final days of the Galactic Republic. The Geonosians, notorious for their skills in weaponry and technology, began working on a design for what they called the ultimate weapon, a colossal space station with the ability to destroy entire planets with a single shot from its massive super laser. This project was intended to give those who controlled it absolute power over the galaxy. The plans for this devastating weapon were handed over to Count Dooku, a former Jedi Knight and now the leader of the Confederacy of Independent Systems, CIS, under his Sith guise as Darth Tyrannus. Dooku, who was secretly serving Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord orchestrating the fall of the Republic and the rise of the Empire, kept the plan safe during the First Battle of Geonosis. Following the battle, Dooku presented the plans to his master, Darth Sidious, as well as the Republic's Supreme Chancellor, Sheev Palpatine, who was secretly Sidious's Sith apprentice. The Death Star project became a pivotal part of Palpatine's vision for the galaxy, a tool of fear and control that would ensure his reign could not be challenged. However, as the Clone Wars raged on, the Death Star plans remained hidden from the Jedi Order, despite a few close calls. In one such instance, Jedi General Aayla Secura and her astromech droid, QTKT, uncovered a potential lead on the Death Star project during a covert mission. The two infiltrated a secret research facility located on an unmapped moon, where the plans were believed to be stored. However, their discovery was cut short when Asajj Ventress, a Sith assassin and agent of Count Dooku, intercepted them. Ventress engaged Secura in a fierce lightsaber duel, preventing the Jedi from uncovering the full scope of the plans. This encounter further solidified the Death Star project's secrecy, ensuring it remained hidden from the Jedi for the time being. Despite these setbacks, the plans for the Death Star continued to evolve, eventually leading to the creation of the iconic space station that would bring about the Galactic Empire's dominance through terror. The construction of the Death Star was a massive undertaking that involved a complex web of political and corporate alliances, bringing together various factions with their own interests. Key among these were the Trade Federation, the Munalinst banking clan, and the Techno Union, all of whom provided funding and resources for the project. These organizations had long been aligned with the separatist cause and were eager to see the Galactic Republic fall, seeing the Death Star as the ultimate tool for achieving their goals. However, the project's funding was not entirely one-sided. Covertly, the Republic itself, under the direction of Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, provided resources, ensuring that both sides of the conflict were unknowingly contributing to the creation of the Empire's most potent weapon. The Geonosians, the insectoid species native to the desert planet of Geonosis, were tasked with the initial designs for the Death Star. Poggle the Lesser, the leader of the Geonosians, later claimed under Republic interrogation that the schematics for the weapon had been given to them by Count Dooku, and that the Geonosians' role had been to refine the plans. While they had not been the original architects of the station, they had played a significant role in its development. Poggle's admission suggested that the Geonosians had not fully understood the scope of what they were working on, but they had been responsible for the engineering that allowed the plans to be fully realized. The Stalgason Hive, a faction of Geonosians, had initially begun designing the station's superlaser, the centerpiece of the Death Star's devastating power. However, as the Battle of Geonosis and the broader conflict of the Clone Wars escalated, they were unable to complete the design in time. The key component of the Death Star's weapon, a powerful superlaser array, remained unfinished when the battle erupted. The laser would later be constructed with the aid of further technological advancements and the extensive resources provided by the factions backing the project. The inspiration for the superlaser's design came from ancient Sith technology, drawing from their knowledge of massive energy weapons and harnessing the power of kyber crystals, rare, powerful crystals known for their ability to amplify energy. These crystals were central to the weapon's function, acting as the conduit for the immense energy required to fire the superlaser. The technological foundation laid by the Sith in their pursuit of domination in the galaxy was resurrected and improved upon, leading to the creation of the weapon that would become a symbol of the Empire's iron-fisted control over the galaxy. Thus, the Death Star was born not only from the ambitions of its creators, but also from centuries of technological development and political intrigue. The factions that funded and designed it, intentionally or not, were unknowingly creating a force that would alter the course of galactic history. By 21 BBY, the Republic Special Weapons Group had already considered creating a range of superweapons, including plans for an automated battle moon asteroid and a torpedo siege platform. However, these ideas never progressed beyond the design stage, as they lacked the necessary resources and time to be realized amidst the chaos of the Clone Wars. In the aftermath of the Second Battle of Geonosis, a crucial turning point in the war, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine took an active role in shaping the future of the war effort. During a top-secret briefing with the Republic Strategic Advisory Cell, Palpatine presented the plans for the Death Star. The true origin of these plans was unknown to those within the Republic. Although they were presented as a new intelligence breakthrough, most believed that the Death Star plans had somehow fallen into Republic hands during or shortly after the Battle of Geonosis. The Republic Strategic Advisory Cell, consisting of military leaders and Republic officials, was led to believe that the Separatists, under the leadership of Count Dooku, were secretly constructing a powerful superweapon of their own. Palpatine capitalized on this fear, playing on the growing anxiety about the war's future, and framed it as a dire threat to the Republic. In truth, Palpatine, who had secretly been Darth Sidious all along, had already orchestrated the creation of the Death Star from the shadows. He used the fear of a separatist superweapon to justify his increasing control over the Republic's resources, redirecting vital funds and personnel toward his own hidden project. His move was a masterstroke in political manipulation, as he utilized the growing paranoia and wartime urgency to push forward a project that would solidify his vision of an iron-fisted empire. Thus, what appeared to be an attempt by the Republic to defend against an existential threat was, in reality, a ruse set in motion by Palpatine to accelerate the development of the Death Star in secret. The project, which would eventually grow into the ultimate symbol of Imperial power, began not out of defense or necessity, but as part of Palpatine's long-term plan for galactic domination. The Strategic Advisory Cell was the key body responsible for overseeing the construction and development of the Death Star, meeting regularly in the Strategic Planning Amphitheater of the Republic Center for Military Operations on Coruscant. This high-security location was the nerve center for the Empire's most secretive military project. The meetings brought together a diverse and influential group of individuals, totaling around 150 beings, who held key positions in various factions and sectors of the Republic's war machine. These individuals were selected for their expertise and strategic importance to the Death Star's construction. Attendees included senators from influential worlds, representatives from prominent shipyards like Corellian Engineering, Quat Drive Yards, and Rendley Star Drive, all of which were critical to the production of the massive battle station. Alongside these industrial representatives were high-ranking officials from the Republic military, including military commanders and advisors, and prominent members of the War Production Board, which oversaw the allocation of resources for the war effort. Specialists like structural engineers, starship designers, and theoretical physicists contributed their knowledge to help realize the Death Star's immense technological requirements. Figures such as Dr. Gubacher and Professor Sahali, who were likely prominent in the development of advanced weaponry or scientific aspects of the project, were also involved. One key figure in these discussions was Lieutenant Commander Orson Krennic, who played a pivotal role in the overall leadership and execution of the Death Star project. As the director of the Death Star program, Krennic was central to the project's progression, reporting directly to Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, who, as a Sith Lord, had secretly been orchestrating the construction from behind the scenes. Vice Chancellor Mas Amedda, who served as Palpatine's right-hand man, was also present at these meetings, helping to facilitate the political and administrative aspects of the project. Palpatine himself, ever the master manipulator, used these gatherings to both oversee the project's direction and maintain his tight control over the galaxy's military forces. His presence, while often indirect, ensured that the Death Star's development advanced according to his hidden agenda. Despite the high level of secrecy surrounding the project, the Jedi Order was kept completely in the dark about the Death Star's existence. They were never invited to any of these strategic meetings and remained unaware of the project being developed over Geonosis, even as the galactic conflict reached its peak. This exclusion of the Jedi from the decision-making process was a deliberate move by Palpatine, who sought to undermine and isolate the Jedi, positioning himself as the only true authority in the Republic. The Strategic Advisory Cell thus operated as the driving force behind the Death Star's construction, bringing together the brightest minds and most powerful figures in the Republic, all while keeping the true nature of the project a closely guarded secret. This secrecy allowed Palpatine to proceed with the creation of the ultimate weapon, a tool that would ultimately serve his vision of galactic domination. The construction of the Death Star was shrouded in secrecy, with all members involved in the project being required to sign the official secrets oath. This was a critical measure to ensure that the highly classified nature of the superweapon remained under wraps, and that no leaks could jeopardize the Republic's plan to build the ultimate weapon. The project's funding was near unlimited, provided through the Republic's wartime budget, but this funding came with a stipulation that the Republic's political leaders were deeply invested in the success of the project. The Republic's fear of a potential separatist battle station played a crucial role in the decision to back the Death Star. With vast resources, Republic intelligence surmised that the Separatists, under the leadership of Count Dooku, were working on a battle station of their own. This theory was supported by the failure of Dooku to attack the Geonosian facility during the First Battle of Geonosis, despite the significant opportunity it presented. While the evidence of a separatist project was mostly speculative and unsubstantiated, this fear was enough to justify massive funding and resources directed toward building the Death Star, which was viewed as a necessary step to maintain the Republic's military superiority. At the same time, Geonosian leader Poggle the Lesser, who had been deeply involved in the initial schematics for the Death Star, continuously maintained that the Separatists did not have their own superweapon project. He argued that the Republic's assumption was baseless. However, many of the officials within the Strategic Advisory Cell, the governing body overseeing the Death Star's construction, were deeply skeptical of Poggle's claims. To avoid jeopardizing Republic funding and potentially undermining the project, they continued to operate under the belief that the Separatists were working on a rival weapon. The reluctance to dismiss this possibility entirely helped maintain the high priority status of the Death Star, as any shift in focus might have undermined the already enormous political and financial investment into its creation. Even though Poggle the Lesser's statements were considered by many to be unreliable, rejecting the idea of a separatist battle station would have risked weakening the justification for the Death Star's development. This situation ultimately placed the Republic and its leadership, particularly Palpatine, in a position where the project's continued construction became a matter of both military necessity and political strategy, further solidifying the Emperor's grip on power. The construction of the Death Star was a massive covert operation, carried out over the course of several years with significant involvement from a variety of research firms and contractors, many of which were unaware of the ultimate purpose of their work. Funding for the project, which would have seemed questionable before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, became more plausible as the war intensified. The war effort drove demand for new technologies and innovations in areas like shielding, power supply, and material production. Consequently, many research firms were unknowingly drawn into the Death Star project through government contracts for specific technologies that would later be used in the construction of the battle station. Researchers and scientists working on these defense technologies were bound by the Official Secrets Oath, a confidentiality agreement that prevented them from disclosing any information about their work. This helped to maintain the secrecy of the Death Star's true purpose, even as the various contractors contributed pieces of the puzzle without ever realizing the enormity of what they were helping to build. The initial construction of the Death Star was carried out by advanced, specialized machines designed to perform complex tasks in space. Some of these machines were operated by sentient beings stationed in orbital command habitats to ensure precise control of the construction process. In addition to the machines, a fleet of ships was constantly at work, bringing in the raw materials required to build the massive station. These ships were tasked with hauling in metals, organic materials, and supplies of water, all of which were necessary for the station's construction and long-term functionality. The construction project also involved the mining of asteroids. These asteroids were towable through the use of tractor beams and brought from both the vicinity of the Geonosis system and nearby asteroid fields. Once the asteroids were collected, they were transported to foundries in synchronous orbit around Geonosis, where they were processed into materials such as durasteel and other metals. These materials were essential for the creation of the station's structural framework, defensive systems, and superlaser. The sheer scale of the operation and the vast resources required reflected the Imperial ambition behind the project, showcasing the lengths to which Palpatine and the Republic were willing to go to achieve military supremacy. By 21 BBY, significant progress had been made on the construction of the Death Star, particularly after the completion of Phase 1. The Strategic Advisory Cell overseeing the project proudly announced that the supports for the station's superstructure had been completed, reaching a massive 160 kilometers in diameter from pole to pole. This massive scale represented a key milestone in the project's long-term vision. Once the superstructure was in place, the next phase of construction involved creating a temporary equator for the station. This would provide a reference point for the development of the station's spherical form. Along with the equator, longitudinal bands were installed to help approximate the sphere's overall shape. These bands, once secured, would provide the framework for the rest of the station's construction. At this point, the focus shifted to the hull construction, marking the beginning of a more tangible, recognizable form. As the outer shell was being assembled, the interior began to be partitioned into individual sections that would eventually house various systems, weapons, and facilities. To prepare for the eventual habitation and operational use of the Death Star, the construction process also involved cladding, sealing, and pressurizing the interior spaces. This allowed the station to support not only droids, but also sentient laborers, who would be employed in constructing and operating various sections of the station. The inclusion of sentient workers was an important step, as it showed that the station was moving beyond just being a machine, becoming a fully functional battle station that required living beings for its operation. The cannibalized droid factories that were originally built by Bactoid armor on the surface of Geonosis played a crucial role in supporting these efforts. The droid factories were repurposed to assist in mass-producing the necessary components for the Death Star's construction. Their integration allowed for additional foundries to go online, ensuring a steady supply of materials and enabling the accelerated pace of the station's assembly. This strategic repurposing of existing infrastructure was vital in maintaining the momentum needed to complete the Death Star in a timely manner. The construction of the Death Star continued at a rapid pace as the project advanced into its next phases. Initial labor estimates indicated that millions of sentient workers would be required to fully staff and support the construction of the station. A subcommittee of the Strategic Advisory Cell even considered a proposal to commission the Kaminoans to create clones specifically tailored for the deep space work required for the project. However, this plan was not immediately pursued. Meanwhile, Orson Krennic, the ambitious director of the project, negotiated a deal with Poggle the Lesser, the Geonosian leader. In return for his cooperation, Poggle agreed to supply Geonosian workers to help with the construction of the Death Star. Krennic's negotiations led to his increasing role and influence over the project, despite some of his earlier missteps. Rather than facing repercussions for his actions, Krennic was granted more oversight and control, thanks to the support of Vice Chancellor Masa Meda. By the time of the completion of the false equator, the station was beginning to take on a more recognizable shape, though it was still far from resembling the massive spherical structure it would eventually become. Krennic described the early appearance of the Death Star's construction as looking more like an antique gyroscope rather than the fully formed battle station. With the false equator in place, the project moved forward with latitudinal structural members being added to the upper hemisphere, which began to take shape. Rudimentary layout work on the station's hull also commenced, with cladding beginning to cover sections of the curved surface. The work was still in its early stages, but the basic framework was now apparent. Inside the station, construction droids were busy creating the first interior spaces. These areas would serve as temporary placeholders until the actual cabin spaces could be fully developed and bulkheaded. The first organics to inhabit these life support modules were the Geonosians, who were tasked with overseeing early operations and construction, further cementing their role as integral to the Death Star's development. Following Poggle the Lesser's announcement of the Death Star project to the Geonosians, the construction effort ramped up significantly. Tens of thousands of drones were transferred to Orbital Foundry 7, which was the second largest structure in orbit and visible from the command habitat. These drones played a crucial role in constructing some of the most vital components of the battle station. The pie-slice-shaped concavities that would eventually form the super laser focusing dish and the power well. By this time, construction was well underway, with 3 slices of the dish completed and another 6 in various stages of progress. These concavities were essential to the operation of the Death Star, as they would house the station's most powerful weapon, the super laser capable of destroying entire planets. The drones, while integral to the work, were not working alone. They were overseen by winged soldiers, a specialized force of Geonosians loyal to Poggle the Lesser and organized into caste systems. These soldiers ensured that the labor proceeded smoothly and that the drones remained on task. Poggle himself, in line with his high status, enjoyed a lavish suite, which was connected to the foundry by a series of tubular connectors. This suite served as both a living area and a command center for overseeing operations, making it clear that Poggle had a significant role in both the construction and governance of the project. His command was pivotal in ensuring the project moved forward, despite the complex nature of its construction and the immense scale of the station. The assembly of the Death Star's super laser dish was a monumental task. The plan involved constructing the parabolic dish in space and then maneuvering it using tugs and tractor beams into a massive well that had already been framed into the upper hemisphere of the station. This well, referred to as the dimple, would serve as the foundation for the dish's final placement. The parabolic dish was a critical component of the Death Star's weaponry. It was specifically designed to telescope away from the hull, which would allow it to aim the composite beam proton super laser, a weapon that was still under development by the Special Weapons Group scientists. However, the weapon's design was incomplete by the time the station's construction began, leading to a crucial challenge for the project team. Many involved in the construction believed that function would have to follow form. This meant that they had to proceed with assembling the station's key components based on the assumption that the super laser would eventually be perfected to match the station's structure. To oversee the process of the dish's assembly, Orson Krennic was placed in charge. His responsibility included managing the construction, assembly, and installation of the dish, a task that would be vital in ensuring that the Death Star's super laser would be ready once the station was operational. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the weapon's completion, Krennic's leadership in this stage of the project would prove crucial in bringing the station closer to its eventual destructive power. Poggle's production philosophy on the Death Star was a harsh and exploitative approach. By forcing drones to perform tasks that were beneath their skill or caste level, he aimed to maximize output. But this came at the expense of morale. The drones, who were used to more specialized tasks, became increasingly unhappy with their labor conditions. Despite this, Poggle's method proved effective in terms of quantity, as the pie-sliced dish modules were finally fabricated, although the super laser dish itself had not yet been fully assembled. Meanwhile, work on the upper hemisphere and cabin spaces in the pole region was progressing slower than expected due to the vast scale and complexity of the construction. In a tragic turn, Geonosians began to die off in large numbers due to their unique physiological needs. The Geonosians required regular work to stay healthy, and without it, they suffered physically. Despite this, Poggle insisted that this phenomenon created competition and provided motivation for the remaining workers, pushing them harder to meet the demands of the project. However, when some workers began to refuse orders, Marines were brought in to exterminate those who failed to comply, further intensifying the brutality of the labor conditions. As the station's construction continued, it became clear that Poggle's leadership was a double-edged sword, driving efficiency at the cost of significant suffering and loss of life among the Geonosian workers. This dark chapter in the Death Star's creation demonstrated the extreme measures taken to complete the project, regardless of the human or Geonosian cost. By 19 BBY, the situation on the Death Star had reached a boiling point. The Geonosian labor force engaged in a full-scale riot, destroying months of progress. The timing of the riot was critical. During this period, the parabolic focusing dish was close to being fully assembled, the hull cladding had been added, and interior spaces had been bulkheaded and made habitable. The living conditions for the drones had been slightly improved, and measures were taken to reduce overcrowding. But the workers' resentment had reached a peak. However, the riot was actually a diversion orchestrated by Archduke Poggle the Lesser, the leader of the Geonosians. Under the chaos of the revolt, Poggle managed to escape, secretly boarding a small craft that had been outfitted with a hyperdrive by his loyal drones. This clever move allowed Poggle to evade the Republic and escape back to the Separatists, effectively abandoning the Death Star project at a critical time. While the riot may have seemed like a spontaneous outburst, it was in reality a carefully planned escape by Poggle, who used the unrest as cover to flee and preserve his life from the Republic's grasp. This moment marks a pivotal point in the Death Star's creation, as Poggle's absence would create a void in leadership for the Geonosian workforce and contribute to further disruptions in the station's construction. During the Clone Wars, the Separatists scoured the galaxy for kyber crystals to power the Death Star's superlaser. These crystals were essential for the functioning of the superlaser, which was designed to harness their immense energy for destructive purposes. The kyber crystals had long been used in the construction of lightsabers, but their potential for massive destruction was realized when the Separatists sought to use them for the Death Star's weapon. One particularly notable attempt to acquire kyber crystals occurred on the outer rim planet of Utapau. The Separatists, under the direction of Count Dooku, sought to procure a large quantity of kyber crystals from a secret mining operation. However, their plans were foiled by the intervention of Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. The Jedi, investigating the Separatist activities on the planet, managed to prevent the shipment of the kyber crystals, successfully interdicting the operation and halting the progress on the weapon. This failure was one of many setbacks the Separatists faced during the war, but the efforts to secure kyber crystals for the Death Star continued throughout the conflict. The Republic, and later the Empire, were aware of the kyber crystals' importance and their potential for use in powerful weapons, which made the race to control them a key aspect of the Clone Wars and the eventual development of the Death Star. In 19 BBY, the Clone Wars came to a dramatic conclusion. The conflict, which had raged for 3 years, ultimately ended with the Republic's victory over the Separatists. However, this victory was part of a larger, more insidious plan, orchestrated by Darth Sidious, the Sith Lord secretly controlling both sides of the war. After the fall of the Separatist alliance and the defeat of its leadership, including Count Dooku, Sidious' former apprentice, and General Grievous, Sidious moved quickly to eliminate his puppets and consolidate his power. With the war over, Sidious declared the Republic dissolved, and in its place, he proclaimed the formation of the Galactic Empire. He anointed himself as the first emperor, casting aside the Senate and establishing a totalitarian regime centered around his rule. This marked the end of the Galactic Republic and the birth of the Empire, with the Emperor wielding absolute power. The Jedi Order, once the defenders of the Republic, was declared traitors and hunted to near extinction in a campaign called Order 66. The Republic's military forces were restructured into the Imperial Army, and the galaxy fell under the strict control of Emperor Palpatine and his empire, setting the stage for the rebellion and the events of the original trilogy. Sidious's victory marked the beginning of a dark era for the galaxy, as the Emperor solidified his tyrannical rule, crushing any opposition and steering the galaxy towards a future defined by oppression and fear. After the Clone Wars ended and the Galactic Empire was proclaimed in 19 BBY, the Ultimate Weapon project was swiftly integrated into the Empire's arsenal. Darth Sidious, now Emperor, ensured that the project, which had been initiated by the Republic, would continue under his watchful eye, but with far greater secrecy. Access to Geonosis, the original site of the Death Star's construction, was heavily restricted. Only a select few Imperial scientists and engineers had knowledge of the project, and very few members of the Imperial hierarchy were even aware of the massive scale of the weapon being developed. To protect the project from external threats and espionage, a highly secure and deceptive supply line was established, with false routes and outposts created to mask the true location of the construction. It was during this time that the battle station was officially named the Death Star and given the designation DS-1, though the early codename Stardust was still used in certain design files and communications. The Death Star became the Empire's top-secret project, known only to a few high-ranking officials. Tian Gergerod, a renowned architect and starship designer from Tenel 4, was brought on board to assist with the construction of the station. Gergerod's expertise in large-scale architectural projects made him an essential asset to the Empire's ambitious endeavor. As the project progressed, Emperor Palpatine entrusted its development to key Imperial figures, including Wilhuff Tarkin, a high-ranking officer with the Imperial Navy, and Orson Krennic, a director with the Advanced Weapons Research Division. Krennic's management of the project, however, led to internal struggles as he sought greater control over the Death Star's direction and purpose, which would eventually play a significant role in the station's story. While the construction of the Death Star continued under the Empire's watch, there was significant internal skepticism and dissent within the Imperial ranks regarding the viability of the project. Not all Imperials were convinced of the weapon's long-term effectiveness, and some were deeply concerned about its potential vulnerabilities. General Jylia Shale, a prominent military figure, was one of the voices of protest against the development of the Death Star. She argued that the resources being poured into the project could be better used elsewhere, and she foresaw the risks associated with placing all of the Empire's faith in a single, massive weapon. Despite her objections, her concerns were largely ignored, and over time, her input was marginalized by the higher-ups who were firmly invested in the project. On the other hand, Grand Admiral Balanhai Savat expressed a more measured skepticism. While he acknowledged that the Death Star could serve the Empire for a significant period, perhaps 5, 10, or even 50 years, he doubted its long-term survivability. Savat believed that eventually someone would figure out how to disable or destroy the station, undermining its intended role as the ultimate weapon of control. He saw it as an enormous gamble that could ultimately backfire. General Cassio Taga also shared concerns, especially with regard to the Empire's over-reliance on the Death Star. He argued that having such a monumental weapon as the Empire's sole means of defense and offense was a dangerous mistake. Taga believed that diversifying the Empire's military assets and strategy would be far more prudent rather than putting all the Empire's eggs in one basket. Despite his concerns, the Death Star project proceeded, and its destructive power would soon become a symbol of Palpatine's totalitarian regime. The Tarkin Initiative, an Imperial think tank, played a crucial role in shaping the conceptual and technical aspects of both the first and second Death Stars. This initiative was instrumental in refining the design of the Death Star and ensuring its transformation from a mere idea into the galaxy-shaking superweapon it would become. However, despite the collaborative efforts of many Starship designers and engineers working on the project, no one outside of Emperor Palpatine knew the full history behind the Death Star's creation. This secrecy surrounded the weapon's origins, and rumors circulated within the Imperial ranks about its history. Some speculated that the Death Star was originally a separatist creation, engineered by Geonosian Archduke Poggle the Lesser and his hive colony, commissioned by Count Dooku. Though these rumors held weight among certain Imperial officers, they were never definitively proven. One significant piece of evidence, however, pointed to the possibility that the Death Star's plans must have indeed fallen into the hands of the Republic long before the Clone Wars ended. By the time the war concluded, components of the Death Star, including its shell and laser-focusing dish, were already in progress. This raised suspicions that the project had originated during the war, even if its development under Palpatine's rule had been shrouded in secrecy and misdirection. The story behind the Death Star's origins remained clouded by confusion and speculation, with most of the galaxy unaware of the full extent of its creation and the deep-rooted history tied to the Sith's plans. Shortly after the proclamation of the New Order, Emperor Palpatine and Lord Vader visited the Death Star, accompanied by Governor Tarkin, arriving aboard a newly commissioned Imperial-class Star Destroyer. At this point, the focusing dish had been successfully installed, marking a significant milestone in the Death Star's construction. Orson Krennic, who had overseen much of the earlier development, believed he was intentionally left off the exclusive passenger list due to the recent escape of Poggle the Lesser, which occurred under his supervision. Both Wilhuff Tarkin and Orson Krennic sought to gain control over the Death Star project, and the competition between them was fierce. To further his own ambitions, Krennic had been manipulating his longtime friend Galen Erso since the Clone Wars. Krennic had brought Erso into Project Celestial Power, an Imperial research division secretly dedicated to weaponizing Galen's kyber crystal research. Krennic believed that by leveraging Erso's work, he would secure oversight of the Death Star project and rise to the rank of Rear Admiral. To strengthen his position, Krennic also engaged in a covert operation to exploit legacy worlds, which were legally exempt from exploitation, by using the independent contractor Haz Obit to deliver weapons and war materials to Samovar, Wadi Rafa, and other planets rich in resources like Dunium and Dolomite. After discovering the weapons on these planets, Krennic used the threat of separatist holdouts as an excuse to appropriate the reserves for the Empire's own use, consolidating his power and furthering his ambitions. Through these maneuvers, Krennic aimed to secure not only control over the Death Star, but also a higher position in the Imperial hierarchy, setting the stage for further power struggles within the Empire. Wilhuff Tarkin viewed Orson Krennic's unauthorized appropriation of planets as a dangerous sign of Krennic's overreaching ambition and a blatant disrespect for authority and the Imperial chain of command. Despite sharing similar goals, namely taking full control of the Death Star project, Tarkin was wary of Krennic's impulsive and self-serving tactics. Knowing that both of them were being considered for a promotion by the Emperor, Tarkin believed that Krennic's behavior would eventually undermine his position, making him an easy target to be blamed for the inevitable construction delays and challenges surrounding the Death Star project. Tarkin, always calculating, chose to bide his time, allowing Krennic to take the lead while secretly positioning himself to replace him when the moment was right. Tarkin's strategy was to use Krennic as a scapegoat, allowing the project to fail under Krennic's leadership. Tarkin also avoided rushing into the role of overseeing the Death Star project, knowing that the Emperor's recognition of such a move would come too soon, leaving him vulnerable to suspicion. So, Tarkin continued to defer to Krennic, waiting for the opportunity to act. Meanwhile, Krennic was equally aware of Tarkin's ambitions and sought to keep Tarkin occupied, knowing that Tarkin's reputation and position could pose a significant threat to his own. In 18 BBY, Krennic orchestrated an insurgency within the Salient system, fully aware that Tarkin would be forced into a long, drawn-out battle. The conflict would keep Tarkin tied up for weeks, diminishing his standing with the Emperor, which could open the door for Krennic to outmaneuver him in the power struggle. This complex rivalry between Tarkin and Krennic exemplifies the cutthroat nature of Imperial politics, where ambition and cunning could make or break careers, and even the smallest misstep could lead to ruin. The early stages of testing the Death Star's superlaser were fraught with difficulty and catastrophic consequences. The first test firing resulted in the destruction of an entire city on Malpass, demonstrating just how dangerous the weapon could be if it went wrong. However, it wasn't until later that a successful test firing occurred at an isolated black hole binary system known as the Hero Twins. Preliminary scans of the test firing revealed that the energy released was equivalent to the combined firepower of an entire Kiwaz-class Star Destroyer. This test provided the first real indication of the immense destructive potential of the superlaser. The laser was powered by a Kyber crystal-assisted twin laser array, which had been carefully assembled and calibrated on Hyperi. It was then installed on an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, which had been appropriated by the Special Weapons Group for the test. Despite the test's importance, there was a great deal of caution surrounding its execution. Grand Vizier Masameda had hoped the test would take place closer to the core, but Orson Krennic wisely urged caution. He knew that any misfire could result in the destruction of the ship and possibly much more. Thus, the test was conducted at a more isolated location, ensuring that any potential mishap would not have catastrophic consequences for the Imperial fleet. The success of the test marked a turning point for Krennic's position in the Empire. His careful planning and foresight were recognized, and as a result, he was promoted to full commander. This victory bolstered Krennic's standing within the Empire and solidified his involvement in the Death Star project. bringing him a step closer to his ultimate ambitions of controlling the weapon's immense power. For over a year, Galen Erso was deeply involved in Project Celestial Power, a covert Imperial initiative that utilized his advanced knowledge of crystallography. He was provided with unlimited supplies of kyber crystals, which had been looted from Jedi temples and lightsabers. Within the project, various research groups were assigned code names such as Pax Aurora, Mark Omega, and Stellar Sphere, all of which worked off of Erso's crucial research. Although Erso initially believed his work was intended to provide a means of inexpensive power for the war-ravaged civilian populations of the galaxy, he was unaware that his findings were actually being weaponized by the Empire. As time passed, Galen began to grow suspicious of the lack of communication and transparency from Orson Krennic about how his research was being applied. This prompted him to investigate further, only to discover that the Empire was using his work to power the Death Star's superlaser, transforming his peaceful scientific efforts into a horrific weapon of mass destruction. Furious and devastated by the realization that his life's work was being twisted for evil purposes, Galen made the decision to escape with his family, his wife, Lyra Erso, and their young daughter, Jyn Erso. The family fled to the remote planet Lahmu, hoping to remain undetected and escape Krennic's wrath. Galen's former colleague, Saw Gerrera, the infamous rebel, aided in their escape. Krennic, meanwhile, was demoted to lieutenant commander due to the Erso family's escape, an action that deeply enraged him. Krennic had expected Galen to further the Empire's goals through his scientific expertise, and his betrayal, choosing pacifism over fame and power, stung. After the Erso family's escape, Wilhuff Tarkin was given oversight of the Sentinel base and the Death Star project, marking a shift in the balance of power within the Empire's research divisions. Tarkin's influence was soon felt as he began to directly oversee the remaining work on the battle station, solidifying his position as a critical figure in the Empire's efforts to wield the Death Star as its ultimate weapon. The construction of the first Death Star continued for several years in the highest secrecy, overseen by Admiral Wilhuff Tarkin and shielded from public knowledge. The Empire employed a vast array of resources to build the battle station, including Wookiee slave laborers and workers from many other species who were forcibly conscripted into the project. Manufacturing facilities from planets like Riosa were seized and pushed to their limits, working tirelessly to produce the components necessary for the station's construction. The majority of the construction occurred in microgravity, micro-G environments, allowing for the massive station's components to be assembled in the vacuum of space. Omnidirectional boosters created artificial gravity within a large cabin space near the surface, where the overbridge, the command center of the station, would eventually be located. This area was the epicenter of a flurry of activity, as the construction was primarily carried out by droids. The station was heavily protected, with a fleet of 4 Star Destroyers and numerous frigates maintaining a guard around it as it hovered in a fixed orbit above Geonosis. However, after 5 years of construction, significant progress had been made, but the station was far from complete. By this time, the Northern Hemisphere's focus lens frame for the superlaser was still little more than a metallic crater, And although some hyperdrive components had been installed, the station was still not capable of jumping to other locations. The scale of the project, combined with the secrecy surrounding it, meant that the Death Star remained an imposing but incomplete symbol of the Empire's ambition. To protect the Death Star project and to obfuscate the true nature of its construction, the Empire established a network of outposts and supply stations during the Clone Wars, including Desolation Station and Rampart Station. These outposts were strategically placed to serve as drop-off points, ensuring that the final destination of supplies and materials remained difficult to trace. Rampart Station in particular acted as a marshalling depot, where vital resources were gathered before being sent to Geonosis. The Sentinel Base was the central hub overseeing this vast network of outposts. Initially deployed from a Victory-class Star Destroyer, this base was tasked with managing the logistics and security of the project. Vice Admiral Dodd Rancid was entrusted with supervising the operation of the base. However, following the Antar atrocity, an operation that resulted in significant political fallout, Wilhuff Tarkin replaced Rancid as the commander of Sentinel Base. Palpatine aimed to shield Tarkin from the repercussions of the incident, but the transition of power led to a period of bureaucratic inefficiency. Tarkin's tenure overseeing Sentinel Base was marked by a complicated, inefficient bureaucracy and difficulties in coordinating the hundreds of supply and sentry outposts created for the project. The Death Star's construction faced numerous obstacles that severely hampered its progress. Shipments from research sites were often delayed. Asteroid mining above Geonosis proved to be unfeasible, and engineers and scientists consistently failed to meet construction phase deadlines. These issues led to increasing frustration within the project. In addition, raids against convoys carrying materials to the station further complicated the situation, creating a significant administrative nightmare. A key part of the Empire's strategy was to prevent any one base commander, whether a Moff, Admiral, or General, from having unrestricted access to crucial information regarding shipments, scheduling, or construction progress. This lack of central oversight meant that only the Emperor truly had control over the entire project, though his visits were rare and infrequent. The construction project, which involved countless suppliers and millions of workers spread across the galaxy, was massive in scale and shrouded in secrecy. This made coordinating efforts effectively nearly impossible. The project's enormous size and secretive nature only compounded the challenges, as leaks and rumors were constant threats. The Imperial Security Bureau and Naval Intelligence Agency worked tirelessly to suppress information leaks and maintain the project's confidentiality. However, the growing discontent and dissatisfaction among former Republic personnel led to regular desertions, with many leaving the project entirely. As a result, Comp Nor created a most wanted list of missing scientists and technicians, prioritizing the recovery of those with the highest level security clearances who had abandoned the Death Star. The attack on Sentinel Base by a highly organized cell of former Republic intelligence operatives, led by Birch Teller, marked a critical moment in the struggle for control over the Death Star project. Tarkin, with the help of Lord Vader, was immediately entrusted with leading the manhunt to track down the operatives responsible for the attack. The investigation attracted the attention of the highest ranks of the Imperial hierarchy, all deeply concerned about the assault's proximity to Geonosis and the attackers' sophisticated tactics. The operatives had managed to introduce a false real-time feed into the local HoloNet relay, diverting Sentinel Base's defenses to Rampart Station, which was falsely believed to be under attack by remnants of the Confederacy, specifically Providence-class, Recusant-class, and Munificent-class warships. This false signal sowed confusion and disrupted the Imperial defenses. After convening with the Joint Chiefs and even meeting with Emperor Palpatine at the Imperial Palace, Tarkin and his forces set their sights on Murkana, where an engagement was planned to investigate the remnants of the Separatist shadow feed operation. However, during the operation, Tarkin's personal starship, the Carrion Spike, was hijacked by the dissident group, marking a significant escalation in the conflict. This move further heightened the stakes and intensified the efforts to track down and neutralize the rebels threatening the stability of the Empire's secret weapon project. Using the stolen Carrion Spike, the dissidents wreaked havoc across several mid- and outer rim worlds, broadcasting their actions through the local HoloNet before the Empire managed to shut down the transmission. The rebels sought to destroy a critical supply shipment heading for the Death Star project, a move that would have crippled Imperial efforts if successful. However, the Imperial fleet, including Star Destroyers Executrix, Compliant, and Enforcer, arrived in time to intercept and stop the insurgents. After the rebels were apprehended, a brutal and covert operation unfolded. The dissidents, along with their secret benefactor, Vice Admiral Dodd Rancid, were captured. Rancid, whose role in the plot was uncovered, had hoped to betray the insurgents above Karita in a strategic move to make it appear as if he had successfully neutralized the rebellion. This would have secured his favor with Emperor Palpatine, potentially earning him a promotion and increased power within the Empire. However, the truth of his involvement was swiftly discovered, and the Imperial Security Bureau, ISB, took control of the situation. Rancid, along with the dissidents, was subjected to torture and executed in secret, ensuring that no trace of their conspiracy remained. This harsh and swift retribution served as a chilling reminder of the Empire's ability to root out dissent and maintain absolute control over its most sensitive projects. To mitigate the military embarrassment caused by Rancid's betrayal, the HoloNet was used to frame the attacks as a deliberate maneuver to flush out and eliminate rebel cells. This strategic narrative aimed to downplay the weakness exposed by the attack, ensuring the public perception remained that the Empire was in control. Despite this effort, the presence of a massive Imperial construction project above Geonosis was well known, though the true nature of the Death Star remained shrouded in secrecy. As a reward for his leadership during this crisis, Emperor Palpatine elevated Wilhuff Tarkin to the newly created title of Grand Moff. This promotion granted him greater authority over the outer systems and cemented his oversight of the Death Star project. With this newfound power, Tarkin was able to direct the efforts of the Empire's most secretive and ambitious weapon. Within just 2 weeks of this promotion, several key sublight engines of the Death Star had been completed. These engines were tested with Tarkin personally overseeing the operation, and they successfully propelled the station beyond Geonosis's rotational speed. Despite his growing control over the project, Tarkin continued to maintain some distance from the station's development. He did not want to claim full responsibility for the Death Star until it was fully operational, leaving room for him to shift blame if issues arose. This created an opportunity for Tarkin to distance himself from failures and setbacks, shifting the blame to Orson Krennic, who had been officially identified as the Director of Advanced Weapons Research. Krennic, now taking the brunt of the responsibility for the project's delays, found himself at the mercy of Tarkin's political maneuvering, which allowed Tarkin to maintain his position of power while avoiding personal fallout. During the construction of the Death Star, the project faced constant delays due to numerous skirmishes and disruptions involving Imperial shipping. One of the more significant setbacks occurred when a band of Lothal rebels attacked an Imperial supply convoy 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, resulting in the destruction of Kyber crystals being transported to the station. This attack, along with other similar incidents, severely hampered the progress of construction. To maintain secrecy and prevent further sabotage, the station was eventually moved from Geonosis to a more secure location. However, in a drastic move to eliminate any potential threat to the station's secrecy, the Empire wiped out the entire Geonosian species, effectively erasing any trace of the species' involvement in the project. 3 years before the Battle of Yavin, one of the construction modules used for the Death Star became the site of a trap set by ISB agent Callus. Callus targeted the same group of rebels who had previously attacked the convoy, now on a mission to uncover the truth behind the mysterious project being developed above Geonosis. Despite the Empire's efforts to capture them, the rebels were able to successfully evade capture, thwarting the Empire's plans once again and revealing the Empire's determination to keep the Death Star project under wraps at any cost. During the construction of the Death Star, Saw Gerrera came dangerously close to uncovering the project. His investigative efforts prompted the Empire to take drastic measures to maintain secrecy. As a result, the Death Star was moved from Geonosis to Scarif around 9 BBY for the final stages of construction. Scarif, a remote planet in the Outer Rim, provided a much more secure location for the project, far from prying eyes. At Scarif, Director Orson Krennic was placed in charge of overseeing the protection of the Death Star. To ensure its security, he was supported by his elite squad of Death Troopers who were tasked with guarding the project and eliminating any threats to its secrecy. This shift to Scarif marked a significant chapter in the Death Star's development, as the Empire sought to finalize its most dangerous weapon in absolute isolation, away from potential threats like Saw Gerrera and other rebel factions. In the midst of the Project Stardust efforts, there were differing opinions on the political implications of the Death Star's completion. Assistant Director Brierly Ronan held the belief that the Death Star's power would render the existing political structure on Coruscant entirely irrelevant. He thought that Emperor Palpatine and Director Krennic would rise to dominate the galaxy, making all other political figures insignificant. Ronan's view was shaped by his perception of the Death Star as the ultimate weapon, one that would secure the Emperor's power beyond anything previously imaginable. On the other hand, Lieutenant Eli Vanto, a former commander in the Imperial Navy and now a member of the Chiss Ascendancy, had a more nuanced view. While he acknowledged the Death Star's importance, he believed that Palpatine would emerge as the sole figure of power in the Empire, eclipsing even Krennic. Vanto felt that Palpatine's strategic genius and long-term vision would ensure his supremacy, regardless of the Death Star's power. Despite these differing views, Ronan remained steadfast in his belief that his superior, Krennic, would not be overshadowed by Palpatine, reflecting a significant tension in how key figures within the Empire viewed the balance of power between the Emperor and the various ambitious officers vying for control over the Empire's future. After Galen Erso's message about the Death Star's fatal flaw reached the Rebel Alliance, the leadership was divided on how to respond to the new threat. Unable to reach a unified decision, a team of operatives from the Alliance to restore the Republic, codenamed Rogue One, was formed to infiltrate the heavily guarded Scarif and steal the Death Star plans. Despite the grave risks, the mission succeeded, and the team managed to secure the technical readouts of the station before the Empire could use the Death Star to destroy the Imperial base on Scarif. The stolen plans were delivered to Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan, an Imperial senator and secret rebel sympathizer. Leia intended to pass the plans to the Rebel Alliance to help them exploit the Death Star's weakness and ultimately defeat the Empire. However, before she could deliver the plans, her ship, the Tantive 4, was intercepted by Darth Vader's fleet. The Imperial forces, led by Vader, captured her, but not before Leia managed to send the plans to the astromech droid R2-D2, along with the protocol droid C-3PO, in an escape pod. Meanwhile, Grand Moff Tarkin, the architect of the Death Star's terror, arranged for a fake weapons test of the station. The target was the primitive planet Rango Tan, where the Death Star's superlaser would be tested on a small, inconsequential world. This test served as a demonstration to assess the willingness of the station's gunner crew to use its destructive power, while also sending a clear message to any who might consider opposing the Empire. In the end, the plans that were safely delivered to R2-D2 and C-3PO would set in motion the chain of events leading to the destruction of the Death Star, igniting hope for the Rebel Alliance and marking the beginning of their ultimate victory over the Empire. After being captured, Princess Leia Organa was detained in cell 2187 of Detention Block AA-23, located on the Death Star. She was subjected to intense interrogation, with the Imperial forces attempting to extract the location of the Rebel Alliance's secret base. However, Leia's resistance to Imperial methods of interrogation proved formidable, prompting Grand Moff Tarkin to take a more psychological approach. Rather than continuing the physical interrogations, Tarkin decided to use the Death Star's devastating power as a means of intimidation. Tarkin threatened to destroy Alderaan, Leia's homeworld, if she did not reveal the location of the Rebel base. Though Leia pretended to relent and provided Dantooine as the supposed location of the base, Tarkin did not believe her, and in an effort to demonstrate the Empire's overwhelming might, he ordered the destruction of Alderaan regardless. The planet was obliterated by the Death Star's superlaser, leaving no survivors. This act of terror was meant to send a message to the entire galaxy that no world was safe from the Empire's reach. In addition to the psychological impact, Tarkin had also been observing the behavior of the station's chief gunner, Endo Frant, who had hesitated to fire on his homeworld. Tarkin's intent was to root out any weaknesses or potential dissent within the crew, ensuring total loyalty to the Empire. By forcing Frant to witness the destruction of Alderaan, Tarkin aimed to break any remaining resistance to the Empire's control. Iden Versio, a senior lieutenant in the Imperial Navy, was among the many personnel on the Death Star who were ordered to witness the destruction, cementing the terror of the Empire's power for all those present. The loss of Alderaan marked a pivotal moment in the conflict, strengthening the resolve of the Rebel Alliance to fight against the Empire and galvanizing their efforts to destroy the Death Star. Following the destruction of Alderaan, the Star Destroyer Devastator departed from the Death Star as part of a mission to investigate the claim that the Rebel base was located on Dantooine, under the command of General Cassio Tag. Upon arriving at the system, the Imperial forces discovered that the base had already been abandoned. This revelation infuriated Grand Moff Tarkin, who realized that Leia Organa had lied about the location and further fueled his desire for revenge. In his rage, Tarkin took a brutal action to maintain control and demonstrate that no one could challenge the Empire's authority. He ordered the execution of Chief Gunner Endo Frant and every other gunner who had hesitated to fire on Alderaan, as he viewed their reluctance as a weakness. This decision was part of Tarkin's ongoing efforts to eliminate any form of dissent within the Death Star's crew, ensuring strict loyalty and obedience. However, Darth Vader, recognizing the potential value of Leia as a source of information, convinced Tarkin to spare her life. Instead of executing her immediately, they decided to allow Leia to be captured by a group of outlaws, who would later turn out to be Han Solo, Chewbacca, and others, hoping that they would lead the Empire directly to the Rebel Alliance's hidden base. This plan would eventually set the stage for the events that followed. Meanwhile, Professor Thlu Rai, an Imperial scientist, was also present aboard the Death Star, working on final alignment tests for the super laser before the station departed for its next mission. The continued presence of key figures like Thlu Rai underscored the ongoing preparations for the Death Star's role in the Empire's ultimate plans. The Death Star followed Princess Leia Organa and her allies to the Yavin system, where the Rebel Alliance had established its base on Yavin 4. After receiving the technical readouts of the Death Star from R2-D2, the rebels discovered the fatal flaw in the station's design. This flaw, introduced by Galen Erso, was a weakness in the station's main reactor, which could be exploited by a precise strike. The rebels formulated a desperate and high-risk plan to destroy the station before it could use its super laser to destroy the rebel base on Yavin 4. As outlined by Alliance tactician Jan Dodonna, the plan called for starfighters to fire proton torpedoes into a 2-meter-wide thermal exhaust port located in the station's Meridian Trench. The exhaust port led directly to the Death Star's main reactor, where the flaw introduced by Erso would trigger a chain reaction, ultimately destroying the entire station. Despite the station's immense size and powerful defenses, the thermal exhaust port was relatively unguarded due to the Death Star's design philosophy, which prioritized defense against large-scale attacks over such a small but critical vulnerability. The rebels understood that this could be their only opportunity to strike, leading to the formation of a bold daring mission to exploit this flaw before it was too late. The Battle of Yavin began with the Rebel Alliance launching their attack on the Death Star. At first, the Rebels had an advantage due to the small size and maneuverability of their starfighters, which allowed them to dodge the Death Star's turbo laser fire. However, the tide turned as Lord Vader launched a wave of TIE fighters, personally commanding them in his TIE Advanced X-1. This led to the destruction of most of the Rebel starfighters, severely diminishing their numbers. In a final desperate attempt, Luke Skywalker, a Tatooine native piloting a T-65B X-Wing starfighter, made a successful run toward the thermal exhaust port. Despite the overwhelming odds and the Empire's best efforts to stop him, Luke fired a pair of proton torpedoes into the exhaust port. As anticipated by Galen Erso, the torpedoes struck the main reactor, setting off a chain reaction that caused the Death Star to explode, taking with it the Empire's most powerful weapon. Luke's success was pivotal, marking a significant victory for the Rebel Alliance and a devastating blow to the Empire. In the aftermath of the Death Star's destruction, the galaxy was filled with uncertainty. The usual streams of communications from the station ceased abruptly, leaving the Empire in shock. As news of the Death Star's defeat spread across the galaxy, rumors circulated wildly, with many speculating on the causes and consequences of the destruction. In an effort to confirm the worst fears of the Empire, a Gozanti-class cruiser piloted by Sienna Ree and Baris Hesai was dispatched to the Yavin system. Their mission was to verify the loss of the station and to recover Lord Vader, who had been left stranded in his TIE Advanced X-1 after the destruction of the Death Star. This marked the beginning of a significant shift in the galactic conflict, with the Rebel Alliance gaining a tremendous victory and the Empire reeling from the loss of its most formidable weapon. Following the Death Star's destruction, the Rebel Alliance celebrated their unexpected victory, though they knew the danger was far from over. Aware of the Empire's inevitable reprisal, they quickly began the process of evacuating their base on Yavin 4. The rebels understood that the Empire would not let such a humiliating loss go unpunished, and as a result, they began relocating to avoid the full force of the Empire's wrath. This marked a critical turning point in the galactic conflict, with the Alliance's morale lifted but also facing an uncertain future. The destruction of the Death Star had proven that the Empire could be challenged, but it had also shown just how powerful and ruthless the Empire could be when it retaliated. In the wake of the Death Star's destruction, the Empire swiftly mobilized for a full-scale war, aiming to avenge the loss of its prestigious weapon and maintain its iron grip on the galaxy. Construction on a new DS-2 Death Star II mobile battle station began almost immediately, signaling the Empire's unwavering commitment to rebuilding and strengthening its military dominance. This new station would be even more powerful and capable of wielding the same devastating firepower, ensuring the Empire's future military supremacy. Meanwhile, the Imperial HoloNet worked to downplay the Rebel Alliance's victory, framing the destruction of the Death Star as nothing more than an unprecedented attack, while continuing to emphasize the Empire's ability to annihilate entire planets. This served as a reminder to the galaxy that the Emperor's rule was absolute, and any thought of rebellion would be met with swift and overwhelming force. To further reinforce the Empire's authority, Lord Vader took a more personal approach by sending pieces of the destroyed Alderaan as state gifts to planets suspected of harboring sedition. These macabre gestures were intended to instill fear and remind the galaxy of the Empire's power to obliterate entire worlds without hesitation, thus quelling any potential dissent. In the aftermath of the Death Star's destruction, the Empire faced increased resistance and dissent as the loss of the ultimate weapon emboldened pirate factions and dissident groups across the galaxy. The Emperor, seeking to punish those he held responsible for the setback, initiated a purge at the highest levels of the Imperial bureaucracy. Notable officials, including Moff Kuvern and Minister Kempt, were executed for their perceived incompetence in overseeing the project and failing to prevent the destruction of such a vital asset. In response to the growing unrest, General Cassio Tage was promoted to the newly established rank of Grand General. With this new position, Tage inherited much of the authority that Tarkin once wielded, including oversight of the Empire's strategic planning and military campaigns. Unlike Tarkin, Tage had always questioned the over-reliance on a singular asset like the Death Star. A staunch proponent of the Imperial Navy, Tage believed the future of the Empire lay not in the development of individual weapons of mass destruction, but in utilizing the Empire's existing forces to create a cohesive military strategy. For Tage, the Death Star had been a misguided project, one that could not be relied upon as the sole solution to the Empire's problems. The Emperor, recognizing Tage's clear vision and pragmatic approach, placed his trust in the general's strategic shift. Tage was tasked with preparing the Empire for future campaigns while awaiting the completion of the second Death Star. This marked a turning point in Imperial strategy, one that balanced the Empire's technological ambitions with its military might, underlining the Empire's reliance on both fleet strength and individual assets to maintain control over the galaxy. In 5 ABY, following the destruction of the Death Star, remnants of the station's debris were collected by the New Republic. Rather than scrap the wreckage, Princess Leia Organa, in a symbolic act of resilience and remembrance, decided to repurpose it for a greater cause. She arranged for the debris to be sent to the Alderaan flotilla as a gift. This flotilla was tasked with using the material to construct a new space station over the ruins of Alderaan, the planet that had been obliterated by the Death Star years earlier. Leia's decision to repurpose the Death Star's debris was driven by a combination of practicality and emotion. Although initially the idea was to simply scrap the wreckage, Leia used her political influence within the New Republic to ensure that the materials would serve a purpose that honored the memory of her homeworld and its people. This new station would stand as a testament to Alderaan's destruction and to the determination of its survivors, symbolizing both the New Republic's recovery and Leia's continued leadership in the fight for peace and justice. The design flaw that led to the Death Star's destruction never became widely known to the public. While some within the Empire and New Republic correctly suspected that internal sabotage played a role, speculating that Emperor Palpatine had been betrayed by someone on the inside, the official narrative focused solely on Luke Skywalker's heroic shot. According to Imperial propaganda, the rebel pilot miraculously exploited a minor vulnerability, underscoring the Rebel Alliance's threat and justifying harsher crackdowns. The true nature of Galen Erso's sabotage, which deliberately embedded the reactor flaw into the station's design, remained classified. The Empire ensured that knowledge of this betrayal never spread, fearing it would damage its reputation and undermine trust in its military projects. Even after the war, the New Republic did not widely publicize the flaw, possibly to prevent the remnants of the Empire from using that knowledge to correct similar vulnerabilities in future superweapons. Over 3 decades after the Death Star's destruction, the First Order, the Empire's ideological successor, developed a new planetary superweapon known as Starkiller Base. Designed as an improvement over the Empire's Death Star project, this weapon was built directly into the planet Ilum, which had been rich in kyber crystals, the same resource that once powered the Death Star's superlaser. Unlike the Death Star, which required significant time to maneuver and charge between firings, Starkiller Base had a greater strategic advantage. It could fire its beam through sub-hyperspace, allowing it to annihilate multiple targets across different star systems almost instantaneously. This made it far deadlier than the Empire's original battle stations. However, just like both Death Stars, Starkiller Base ultimately suffered from a critical vulnerability. The Resistance, led by General Leia Organa, exploited a weakness in the base's thermal oscillator, a crucial component regulating its immense energy output. A daring X-Wing assault, led by Poe Dameron, and a sabotage mission inside the base, carried out by Finn, Han Solo, and Chewbacca, allowed the Resistance to detonate the oscillator, triggering a chain reaction that destroyed the entire planet, marking another failed attempt to create an invincible superweapon. In 34 ABY, while in self-imposed exile on Ahch-To, Jedi Master Luke Skywalker experienced a vivid dream about an alternate timeline, a reality in which he never joined the rebellion. In this vision, Luke ignored Leia Organa's distress message, never met Obi-Wan Kenobi, and never destroyed the Death Star. Instead of becoming a Jedi, he lived a quiet, uneventful life on Tatooine, eventually marrying Kami Marstrap, a childhood acquaintance. However, this alternate reality took a dark turn. With no rebel intervention, the Death Star remained fully operational under Imperial rule. In addition to Alderaan, the Empire used the superweapon to annihilate other key rebel-aligned worlds, including Mon Cala, home of Admiral Akbar and the Mon Calamari, and Chandrila, the homeworld of Mon Mothma, a key rebel leader. This haunting vision served as a grim reminder of how much his choices had shaped the galaxy. Despite his self-doubt and isolation, the dream reinforced that his actions as a Jedi had been crucial in defeating the Empire and ensuring hope for the future.